On 31 May 1945, about 400 miles southeast of Okinawa, a TBM-1C Avenger from Composite Squadron, VC-13 off the escort carrier USS Anzio CVE-57 found the Japanese submarine I-361 on radar, watched her crash dive, exceeded sonar buoys in the black water, and dropped a Mark 24 Fido. The weapon did not guess. It listened for the beat of propellers, turned gently, and hunted in the dark. Minutes later, a destroyer escort felt the shock through her hull, and the surface foamed with rising oil and fragments. Proof in the moonless dark that the weapon had found its mark. Coordinates 20 degrees 22 minutes north, 134 degrees 9 minutes east. The sea went quiet, and an enemy vanished. The revelation hits harder when you strip away the myth. People still say, radar-guided torpedoes sank I-361. Radar cued the search. But the kill came from an acoustic brain in a 19-inch body that ran about 12 knots for 10 minutes and curved toward noise like a bloodhound. Out of roughly 4,000 produced, 340 Mark 24 seconds were launched in combat. 204 were fired at submarines. 37 boats were sunk, and 18 more damaged, about an 18% effectiveness. Roughly double the aircraft depth charge record. Those numbers tell you this was not luck. It was engineering, training, and a checklist. The human heartbeat inside the machine matters most. Norman Hansen, a U. Navy carrier pilot who trained at Pensacola, told a story that sums up the tone of the American deck. Scrambling on a tense night, he landed hot, forgot to safe his guns, and stitched a 2-second burst across the water that sent a nearby destroyer heaving into a turn. His captain did not shout. He simply said, "You really shouldn't frighten people like that. Calm under pressure is not softness. It is power that knows itself." The enemy felt that power at sea level. Japanese radiomen learned that diving on a radar contact no longer meant safety. Americans could hear the ship's heartbeat through a forest of floating microphones. Kaiten pilots trained for glory in steel coffins never reached a target because the ocean itself had been turned into a listening room. After the explosion that ended I-361, there were no survivors. 5 Kaiten pilots and 76 crew were gone with the boat, and the hunter-killer group was already resetting its search lines for the next contact. Formation steady, radios calm, bridge to what comes next. The name in your title, USS Guitarro SS-363, did not fire the weapon that killed I-361. And that twist is not a problem. It is the point. By late 1945, America fought with many blades at once, fleet submarines starving an empire, while carrier hunters ended the last threats. The shock of the night kill is only the first chapter of a larger truth. A free people learned to make the ocean speak, and then taught a torpedo to listen. Her log places her at Saipan on 27 and 28, May 1945, and at Pearl Harbor by 8 June, far from the hunter-killer scene, yet exactly inside the bigger American plan. That plan paired massed fleet boats that strangled Japan's trade lanes with carrier groups that hunted the last threat boats. While one team bled the empire, another team amputated the limb trying to save it. This is how a nation turns the Pacific into a system. The revelation beats the romance of a duel. People want a single-ship showdown. The truth is an orchestra. Submarines like Guitarro lurked along tanker routes and mined choke points, while units like VC-13 used radar, sonar buoys, and Fido to scrub the ocean of ambushers. The United States did not pick one tool. It fielded them all together and wrote procedures so any crew could plug in and perform. You can feel the culture in cockpit ink and deckplate talk. Norman Hansen described ground school that ran like boot camp for mines navigation, meteorology, engines, fuel and oil systems, and 2 hours of daily PT before anyone touched a cockpit. In the decompression chamber, a flight surgeon pointed at him, laughing in disbelief. The only guy in 10,000 to ace all 3 tests. Weeks later, after that accidental 2-second gun burst across the water, Hansen met a captain who chose discipline over drama. You really shouldn't frighten people like that. That is how you keep speed and safety in the same cockpit. The enemy read the new music too late. Japanese staff officers watched convoy math turn cruel as routes once safe at night began to glow on American radar. Diving no longer saved a boat because the Americans had dropped microphones that stayed and listened. Tenders that surfaced to pass fuel became datums for Avengers, and a weapon that actually hunted. After I-361, the lesson was simple for any skipper still at sea. If you broke the surface, you had already run out of time. Bridge to the next step. Why could America swing many blades at once? Because factories, schools and ships move to the same beat. Because aircraft like the TBM-1C could carry a homing torpedo under the same wing that held rockets. Because destroyer escorts drilled to race to the datum the instant a shock ran through their hulls. On 31 May, southeast of Okinawa at 20 degrees 22 minutes north, 134 degrees 9 minutes east, destroyer escorts USS Oliver Mitchell DE 417 and USS Tabora DE 418 felt the underwater shock that confirmed the kill and then ploughed into the slick to collect debris. I-361 had been converted to carry 5 Kaiten suicide torpedoes. None were launched. The system worked so cleanly that the task group reset formation before sunrise and pressed on. That is what it means to fight with an orchestra instead of a soloist. Radar only found targets. The kill came from an airdropped acoustic hunter, the Mark 24 Fido, that listened for a submarine's propellers and steered toward that sound. In World War II, about 4,000 were built, 340 were launched in combat, 204 were fired at submarines, 37 boats were sunk and 18 damaged. An effectiveness around 18%, roughly double typical aircraft depth charge results. The torpedo itself was about 19 inches in diameter, a bit over 9 feet long, and weighed roughly 680 pounds with a modest warhead that let it listen instead of sprint. It was slow, but patience beat speed underwater, and patience is what America mass-produced. Here is the problem that kept men awake. How do you hunt a needle in an ocean when the needle can dive and vanish? America answered with math and microphones. Avengers used search radar to nail a datum, then crews seeded sonobuoys in a pattern that listened to the sea. The ocean became a map of sounds. The torpedo's vacuum tube brain processed high-frequency whispers, nudged tiny rudders, and cruised at about 12 knots for 10 minutes, roughly 4,000 yards, to chase a boat in the dark. Drop altitude was briefed. Approach speed was rehearsed. Errors were hunted down in debriefs until the next crew could fly the same play. The human element turned clever gear into certainty. Hansen recalled a kamikaze scare and a snap launch to intercept. We gave full bore on an interception course. Some Charlie had approached the fleet, not showing his IFF. Then came the coda, after he forgot to save his guns and stitched that 2-second burst across the water. Captain Lambe's calm line still makes crews smile. You really shouldn't frighten people like that. Those sentences are the attitude of the American deck, fast, trained, and calm. Sensors were not trophies, they were a way of thinking. Crews briefed find, fix, finish before they strapped in. They rehearsed bearings, time to turn, buoy spacing, and attack speeds because the ocean forgets sloppy math. They measured everything and cared more about repeatable results than about glory lines in a diary. That is why night after night an Avenger would slide off the deck with a mark 24 inches the bay and come back with nothing to show but an oil slick and a logbook entry. Routine victory is the loudest boast. The next question, and the bridge to the next chapter, is simple. Who built weapons that could listen in 1943, put them into crates by the thousand, and teach strangers from Kansas and California to use them the same way? The answer is the American factory and the American classroom working together. The numbers they produced will feel unreal, and the clock they kept will make you shake your head. At Ford's Willow Run, workers turned automobile know-how into B-24 Liberators with Pratt & Whitney engines, powered turrets, oxygen plumbing, and jigs so large they looked like bridges. A completed airplane wheeled out roughly once an hour. Shifts swapped at whistles. Cafeterias ran all night. Rivet guns cracked like thunder under skylights. The same spirit filled the small stuff 2 wooden crates of sonobuoys, vacuum tubes wrapped in wax paper, headsets and spare hydrophones packed by the dozen and pushed onto trucks. That pace mattered to the hunt that killed I-361 because logistics makes miracles repeatable. You cannot run a night kill chain unless the next crew can launch with the same kit at dawn. The revelation is simple and stunning. When you can mass-produce complex machines, a smart torpedo stops being a science project and becomes a standard loadout. Escort carriers like USS Anzio sailed with Avengers that carried rockets under wing and a mark 24 inches the bay because industry made it easy to be ready. Manuals taught drop windows. Radios and radar made the search a shared picture. Destroyer escorts drilled to race to the datum the instant a shudder ran through their hulls. The line from a factory clock to an oil slick on open water was short. You can hear the human rhythm inside the numbers. In Pensacola's decompression chamber, a flight surgeon stared at Norman Hansen and told the class, half laughing and half amazed, that he was the only guy in 10,000 to ace all 3 tests. Days later at sea, after Hansen's accidental gun burst whipped a destroyer into an emergency turn, his captain's dry verdict, "You really shouldn't frighten people like that," showed the calm that training builds. That calm makes hard math usable. It turns vacuum tubes and brass screws into confidence. Here is the scale in black and white. U.S. submarines made up less than 2% of the Navy, yet they sank over 30% of Japan's Navy and more than 4.7 million tons of merchant shipping oil, rice, ore, and steel the empire needed to live. Meanwhile, escort carriers multiplied into a moving grid that covered night with radar. A TBM-1C could take off with a homing torpedo, 4 5-inch rockets, and a radar operator who spoke bearings like a drummer keeps time. That combination explains why VC-13 could find a boat at night and end a fight in minutes. End with the shocking closers that set up the payoff. The checklist was the same every time: radar contact, sonobuoy pattern, torpedo drop, destroyer escort confirmation of shock, oil sighted, search resumed. It wasn't a stunt. It was a system built by a free people who let factories and ideas compete, then sent the winners to sea in numbers. The next chapter adds the scoreboard, and it will not look real until you see it twice. That ratio shocks because it is backed by hard counts. more than 4.7 million tons of merchant shipping destroyed, and hundreds of warships removed from the board. Pair that with hunter-killer carriers like USS Anzio, and the pattern that caught I-361 becomes clear. Surface, and you are heard. Run, and you are chased. Linger, and you are gone. This is the math that breaks an island empire. The revelation here is that dominance was designed, not improvised. Radar made darkness useful. Sonobuoys turned water into a listening net. The Mark 24 made contact mean kill, with a probability no depth charge attack could match. 340 launched, 204 fired at submarines, 37 sunk, 18 damaged. And because factories ran hot B 24 seconds rolled off the line every 63 minutes, air crews could train, fly, and rearm on a schedule that beat the enemy's breath. Procedures trumped heroics, and outcomes scaled. Dates and decks lock it to the earth. Guitarro's track shows Saipan on 27 and 28. May 1945. Then Pearl Harbor by 8 June. The same week, VC-13 logged the 31 May night contact, misidentified the class on first sighting, laid buoys, released a single FIDO, and ended the fight at 20 degrees 22 N 134 degrees 09 E. The system did not care which unit got the credit. It cared that the ocean stayed ours. That is why the task group shifted to the next search line without fanfare. The human thread never snaps. Hansen remembered the speed of American training. Weeks of ground school navigation, weather, fuel, oil, hydraulic systems, and Friday tests that forced mastery. Not bluff. After his accidental gun burst across the deck, his captain's steady voice, "You really shouldn't frighten people like that," captured the balance of steel and restraint that defined Allied flight decks. Look at what followed the explosion that killed I-361. Destroyer escorts Oliver Mitchell, DE-417, and Tabora, DE-418, closed the datum at flank speed, lookouts tasting oil in the wind, sailors throwing grapnels to snag planks and papers, radiomen logging bearings while the captain traced the slick with a finger over the chart. They felt the underwater shock through their hulls before they saw the proof on the surface. That choreography air delivers the blow. Surface ships verify. Aircraft reset made every contact a team kill. And submarines like Guitarro could starve shipping lanes because the grid was already hunting. Numbers at scale turn fear into routine. The submarine force stayed small by design, so the rest of the fleet could hunt, escort, bombard, and fuel across a whole ocean. Yet that tiny community destroyed more than a third of the enemy fleet and almost 5 million tons of the merchant lifeline. When you mix that with carriers that turned night into day, you reach a tipping point. The next chapter shows the ultimate payoff, procedures that read like science fiction, and results that ended a war. The Avengers radar painted a contact at 04, 36 inches, a sky without moon. Visual came at roughly 6,000 yards as the conning tower foamed and the boat started down. The pilot called the crash dive. The crew splashed sonobuoys in a pattern and listened. One Mark 24 entered the water, slow and patient. Minutes later, a destroyer escort felt the shock from miles away. Oil and debris spread at 20 degrees 22 minutes north, 134 degrees 9 minutes east. The formation tightened, the search reset. Here is the ultimate payoff in numbers that feel impossible. Fido's wartime record 340 launched, 204 fired at submarines, 37 sunk, 18 damaged made the ocean hostile to any boat that moved. U.S. submarines, under 2% of the Navy, accounted for over 30% of Japan's navy sunk and almost 5 million tons of merchant shipping erased. That is how you end an oceanic war. You make the water itself a weapon, and then you teach thousands of ordinary Americans to use it the same way every night. The scene is real because the dates and unit names are real. USS Anzio CVE-57, Composite Squadron VT-13, USS Oliver Mitchell, Devia 117, USS Tabara, Devia 118, TBM 1C Avenger with an AN divided by APS search radar and a belly full of sonobuoys and one patient torpedo, Mark 24 Fido, 19 inches across and a bit over 9 feet long, listening where eyes fail. 31 May 1945. Southeast of Okinawa at 20 degrees 22 minutes north, 134 degrees 9 minutes east. 81 men lost with I-361, including 5 Khitan pilots who never got near a target. Carry one last human note forward. Hansen's class at Pensacola lined up for ground school week after week navigation, meteorology, fuel, oil, hydraulic systems, and Friday tests before anyone touched a cockpit. In the decompression chamber, the stunned flight surgeon's line, "He's the only guy in 10,000, became a legend told every new group. Later, after the accidental gun burst across the deck, that same calm captain's voice, "You really shouldn't frighten people like that," summed up American mastery in one dry smile. Serious work, gentle humor, zero doubt. Production kept the checklist alive. At Willow Run, crews averaged 1B-24 per 63 minutes at peak, so spares, trainers and ferry aircraft never stopped flowing. The arsenal of democracy was not a slogan but a timetable. When Hansen recalled a scramble on a false kamikaze alarm, we gave full bore on an interception course. Some Charlie had approached the fleet, not showing his IFF. You can hear how technology, training, and tempo felt minute by minute on the deck of a small carrier. Radar found, buoys listened, Fido finished. The bridge to your closing message is the simplest sentence of the war. The ocean stopped being a hiding place. It became a loud room where America owned the microphone radar to spot, buoys to listen, and a torpedo that finished the sentence. Multiply that by a nation that prizes learning, discipline, and compassion, even in combat, and you get the most powerful force for freedom in history. Submariners were roughly 2% of the fleet, yet their boats erased more than a third of Japan's navy and over 4.7 million tons of merchant shipping. That is fuel not burned, rice not eaten, steel not forged. It is convoy routes turning from lifelines into long black funerals at sea. Pair that steady strangulation with the hunter-killer carriers that ended ambushes like I-361. And you see why the Pacific began to feel American after dark. The ocean did not change. We changed what the ocean meant. Radar found distant ghosts. Sonobuoys made the water confess. The Mark 24 Fido listened and turned slow patience into quick endings. Numbers made courage matter more, not less, because training gave ordinary men repeatable ways to do extraordinary things. A TBM, 1C Avenger, could lift it with rockets, a homing torpedo, and a radar set that drew a picture in rain and night. The destroyer escort downrange Oliver Mitchell or Tabara waited to verify the kill with a shock felt through the keel. Oil on the surface was not a miracle. It was the expected result of a checklist. You really shouldn't frighten people like that. Captain Lambe's dry line to Norman Hansen still echoes because it captures the mood. Fast hands, cool minds, no panic. Hansen's flight surgeon at Pensacola, pointing to him as the only guy in 10,000 to ace the chamber tests, shows the range of American excellence bookwork, bodywork, cockpit work, stacked in one rhythm. Japanese radiomen once believed the night belonged to them. Then, they learned the night belonged to our circuits. When a submarine crash-dived, the fight had only started. The listening began. The distance collapsed. We are heard. One enemy petty officer scrawled in a note found after the war. The line feels like a bell tolling in salt air. The scoreboard kept ringing. 2% of the sailors, 1/3 of the enemy fleet, almost 5 million tons folded under the waves. The math is cold, but it carried sons home. The bridge forward is simple. If the night was ours, it is because we built a web in the sky and taught crews to use it the same way from Guam to Okinawa. That web is the next revelation. USS Anzio, CVE 57, did it with a handful of antennas, an airplot table, and pilots who spoke bearings like drummers. Keep time. A green arc on an AN divided by APS screen became a plan. Avengers lifted into cloud, Wildcats orbited, picket ships relayed tracks. The ocean stopped being empty. It became a map. No squawk. A radar operator would say when an approaching contact refused to show IFF. And every back on deck went a little stiffer. Hansen remembered a scramble on a false alarm. We gave full bore on an interception course. Some Charlie had approached the fleet, not showing his IFF. The language is crisp because the stakes were. That same tight talk hunted I-361. Radar cued the first pass. Visual confirmed the sleek back of a boat sliding down. Sonobuoys splashed in a pre-briefed pattern. The Mark 24 went into the dark like a hound on a leash. The DE's downrange felt the thump come up through steel. Oil and splinters turned coordinates into proof. The enemy felt that web closing. A Japanese radio man later told an interrogator, "Night was our ally until your ears went into the sea." That sentence sums up 1,945 better than any diagram. Americans bridged tools and people so well that weather only mattered for takeoff and landing. Everything between was math and nerve. Training turned teenagers into crewmen who could fly a box, lay a buoy, read a screen, and keep their voices even when a blast rolled underfoot. You really shouldn't frighten people like that. Captain Lambe joked after Hansen's accidental deck-level burst. The laughter on that deck was not denial, it was mastery, and mastery is generous with its humour. The web also rescued friends. The same radar that found an enemy wake found a life raft before sunrise. That grace underwrote the power. What binds to the next chapter is simple and brutal. The enemy tried to answer our net with human torpedoes called Kaiten. The net answered back with a procedure. Kaiten were meant to terrorize anchorages, to smash liberty into splinters, to make crews doubt sunrise. Instead, a night radar contact at long range turned into sonobuoys in the black and one patient torpedo in the water. The boat went still under a listening weapon and did not come back. That is a moral as much as a tactic. Courage cannot outrun acoustics. Japanese trainees who expected glory met instruments and procedures. We trained for glory. We met instruments. A captured sailor said later, stunned that microphones and a slow weapon beat his oath. The American side did not gloat. The American side rehearsed. Find, fix, finish. Avengers practiced drop altitudes and buoy spacing until the pattern felt like marching. Destroyer escorts drilled the sprint to datum, the turn into slick, the grapnel toss for debris and papers. A kill was a team letter, not a lone signature. Guitarro's track that week, Saipan, Pearl, then Stateside, proves the system's larger truth. Many blades, one hand. Submarines throttled tankers and colliers. Carriers erased ambushers. Pickets watched the sky. The hand moved as one, and enemy plans withered. Hansen's Pensacola legend, the only guy in 10,000, is not a freak anecdote. It is a window into a culture that measured everything and celebrated mastery. Captain Lambe's soft line, "You really shouldn't frighten people like that," landed the same message with a grin. We are strong enough to be calm. The enemy's shock kept growing. Diving used to mean safety. In 1945, it meant the start of the real hunt, because the microphones did not blink and the torpedo did not get bored. The blast that ended I-361 carried 81 souls, 5 of them strapped to chitin that never moved under their own power. The web held. The ocean judged. The bridge into the final act is the scoreboard nobody believed the first time they heard it. The numbers take your breath. Then they settle as the only way that night could have ended. Willow Run did it with jigs that looked like bridges and lines that never slept. That clock mattered to crews on Anzio as much as a compass bearing. A nation that can schedule miracles can repeat them. Crates of sonobuoys rolled out with the same rhythm as B-24 assemblies. Vacuum tubes for homing circuits arrived wrapped in wax paper, marked and counted like treasure. Training syllabi moved students like aircraft on a taxi line. Ground school, chamber, pattern work, instruments, carrier quals. "He's the only guy in 10,000, the flight surgeon told Hansen's class. And the room cheered because excellence was a team sport. Captain Lambe's, "You really shouldn't frighten people like that." After Hansen's accidental burst shows how discipline sits next to mercy on an American deck. That coupling makes speed safe. It lets checklists breathe. It builds crews who can work tired and still sound like pros. And the output of all that order? 2% of sailors wearing dolphins, over a third of the enemy fleet erased. Nearly 5 million tons of shipping gone. A homing torpedo with an 18% combat effectiveness, roughly double the typical depth charge record. A small carrier that could net 100 miles of ocean and make night a friend. The enemy watched that clock and could not keep pace. Factories in Japan did brave work under bombs and shortages, but no one could match the American habit of turning ideas into pallets and pallets into doctrine. "We met instruments," the captured sailor said. But what he met was a culture-free inquiry, measured truth, and a joy in fixing things until they work for everyone on the team. The link to our next step is the ledger that ends arguments, outputs at scale, across oceans, on time. That ledger does not brag. It states, "This is what happened," and asks only that you believe your own eyes. That is not poetry, that is a process map. Contact, classification, prosecution, kill, reset. A TBM-1C rolled off a deck at dawn with a homing torpedo and a practiced crew. A destroyer escort trimmed for speed, sonar pinging in a measured beat. The air plot updated bearings. The night radar pickets folded back into the screen. Somewhere in the dark, a submarine captain felt the hull sing as he went down, and the microphones began counting. "No squawk," the operator said, and that settled it. Hansen's memory of full bore on an interception course on a no IFF contact carries the mood. Fast, exact, unemotional. The numbers that follow feel unreal until you say them twice. 2% of sailors wearing dolphins. More than a third of the enemy fleet gone. Almost 5 million tons of merchant shipping erased. One bomber every 63 minutes at peak. A homing torpedo that did not need eyes. A radar web that made weather a nuisance, not a shield. The enemy remained brave. The enemy remained skilled. But a brave man cannot outwork a clock and a web at the same time. The POW voices we carry. Hanson's captain's gentle joke, the surgeon's chamber boast. The enemy radio man's night was our ally until your ears went into the sea, form a chorus that explains why resistance grew futile. Procedure did not kill spirit. It harnessed spirit so tightly that the ocean itself seemed to choose sides. The bridge to the finale is the simplest kind of proof. Add the numbers. Look at the track lines. Read the logs. Then try to imagine any other nation matching that total picture in 1945. The mind box, the ledger stands. Free inquiry in a lab, merit in a classroom, checklists on a deck, mercy in a voice that says, "You really shouldn't frighten people like that," and everyone laughs because fear does not own the room. That culture turned radar into shared pictures, sonobuoys into patient ears, and a torpedo into a promise. It also turned strangers into crews who trusted each other at 04. 36 inches, a black sea. He's the only guy in 10,000, the surgeon said, and the class took pride because one man's excellence lifted everyone's standard. The enemy we faced was brave and inventive. We honor that. But bravery alone cannot outrun a people who love learning, measure truth, and fix problems in public until the fix holds. That is why 5 Chiton never moved. That is why a DE felt the shock through her hull and then steamed into oil and splinters to make the report exact. That is why a submarine force that stayed small on purpose could erase a third of an enemy fleet while the rest of the Navy turned night into American time. The holy shit facts remain simple. 1. B-24 every 63 minutes, hundreds of Avengers flying a shared playbook, an acoustic torpedo with an 18% effectiveness. A merchant marine starved without a shot fired at a dock. Put it together, and the ending writes itself. The ocean stopped being a hiding place. It became a loud room where America owned the microphone. We used it without cruelty, with precision, and with a funny kind of kindness that lets a captain correct a hot-handed pilot with a smile. That is the part that lasts. Weapons rust, values travel. When you multiply those values by a continent, you get the most powerful force for freedom in history and a night when the water itself spoke American.